The wine glass never made it to her lips. She stood there, halfway between the kitchen doorway and the dining table, blinking like she couldn't trust what her eyes were telling her. Her fingers clenched tighter around the bottle of rose, the same brand she used to pretend was too sweet for her taste. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because there, at my table, in my new house, with a forkful of roasted salmon halfway to her mouth, sat the woman she never thought she'd see again. Neither of them moved. Not for a second. And I just kept eating. I didn't say a word. Didn't have to. The silence was louder than anything I could have screamed. The air between them thickened like wet concrete. Her fake smile slipped off her face so fast it might as well have hit the floor. If you'd told me 6 weeks ago this scene would happen, that Carla May would walk back into my life uninvited, holding a peace-offering bottle of wine, only to come face to face with her, I would have laughed in your face. But this wasn't 6 weeks ago. This was now, and I wasn't the same man anymore. She tried to recover, took a step back like the table itself had insulted her. You're joking, she said finally. You're actually? You brought her here? I set my fork down slowly, wiped my mouth with a cloth napkin. The other woman, still composed, still elegant, took a sip from her glass and smiled at me without blinking. I looked back at my ex. No jokes left, Carla. Just dinner. And that was only the beginning. Carla didn't move. She stood there, wine bottle in hand, trying to process the scene in front of her like her brain was buffering. Her jaw clenched, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. That same little twitch she used to get when the barista spelled her name wrong on a cup, but now it was for something a little bigger, and a lot more deserved. I leaned back in my chair, elbows resting on the sides, watching her eyes dart between me and my guest, between the man she discarded and the woman she thought she'd erased. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The woman sitting across from me took another bite of salmon, slow and unfazed. She didn't look at Carla, didn't smirk, didn't gloat. That was the worst part, I think. She wasn't playing the game. She was just there, like she belonged. Well, Carla said finally, her voice cutting through the tension like a dull blade. This is bold. I raised an eyebrow. Is it? I mean her? Really? There it was. That sharp, passive-aggressive tone Carla wielded like a scalpel in the last 2 years of our marriage. Always masked as polite conversation, but every word poisoned. It hadn't changed. But I had. I didn't invite you here, I said calmly. You showed up, with a bottle of wine and zero warning. Carla's face stiffened. I thought we could talk, like adults, after everything. I couldn't help but laugh. You mean after you walked out of our marriage like it was a bad TV show you didn't feel like finishing? Carla's eyes flared, only for a second, before she narrowed them at my guest. You really think this is okay? For the first time, the woman at the table looked up. Not defensive, not smug, just steady, calm, and way more in control than Carla could ever hope to be. You gave him up, she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. You don't get to ask what's okay anymore. Boom. Silence. Carla didn't respond, because what could she say? The wine bottle now looked absurd in her hands. A peace offering to a battlefield she didn't realize she no longer had access to. This wasn't her war anymore. She didn't even have a seat at the table. After a few more seconds of awkward, heavy air, she set the bottle down on the counter. Without another word, she turned around and walked out the front door. No goodbye, no door slam, nothing. Just the sound of her heels tapping down my porch steps and vanishing into the evening. I waited until I heard her car start. Then I exhaled. Slowly. The woman across from me put her fork down and smiled gently. That was dramatic. I looked at her. You okay? She nodded. Are you? I didn't answer right away. I stood up, walked over to the kitchen window, and stared out at the quiet street. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath for months, maybe years. But in that moment, it felt like the first time I could finally exhale without it hurting. Yeah, I said quietly. I think I am. But I was wrong. Because that night wasn't the end of the drama. It was the beginning of something a lot more twisted. The door had barely clicked shut behind Carla when the weight of what had just happened sank into the room. My guest, still calm, reached for her glass, but the air between us was different now. The confrontation had changed something, not in a bad way, not hostile, but like we both knew the aftershock hadn't fully hit yet. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed the bottle Carla had left behind, and stared at it for a moment. A ridiculous rose with a label that looked like it belonged in a teenager's fridge. Typical. She always had a way of doing something half-hearted and expecting applause. She's going to spiral, I muttered. My guest didn't respond, just watched me. She always had that kind of presence, like she could see 6 steps ahead, but was patient enough to let you catch up on your own. I walked back to the table and poured the wine down the sink. Maybe symbolic, maybe petty. Either way, it felt necessary. That's when I noticed it. A small black envelope on the edge of my counter, tucked partially under the fruit bowl. I hadn't seen it before. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to touch it, but I did. It wasn't sealed. No name, no handwriting. Just a thick, matte card inside with 3 words written in silver ink. You think you're safe. I stared at it for a full minute, not moving. My guest stood up slowly and came over to look. Her eyes scanned the message, and for the first time that night, her face changed. Not fear, but recognition. I've seen this before, she said quietly. Years ago, back when I thought Carla was just messy, not dangerous. That word, dangerous, clung to the inside of my chest like static. I looked at her, needing more. She used to leave them for people, she said. Men. Sometimes women. Always when she thought they deserved a warning. I thought it was some kind of twisted joke back then, but I was wrong. I didn't know what to say. All I could do was sit down, hard, in the nearest chair. My head was buzzing. Suddenly, Carla showing up tonight didn't feel like a casual drop-in. It felt like a step in a plan, one I didn't understand yet. Why would she leave that here now? I asked. She paused. Then, because she's not done. Not with you. Not with any of this. We sat in silence. The kind where the fridge hum suddenly sounds deafening. My new house, my supposed fresh start, didn't feel so fresh anymore. And Carla? She wasn't just an ex-wife with bad timing. She was still playing a game, one I hadn't agreed to join, but might not be able to avoid. Later that night, after my guest left, I locked every door and window, even the ones I never bothered with before. I pulled the curtains, turned off the porch light, and just stood there in the dark living room with the card still in my hand. I should have thrown it away, but I didn't. And the next morning, there was another one. Same envelope, same ink, different message. The second envelope was on my windshield. I found it just after 6 a.m. when I stepped outside in a hoodie and slippers to grab a breakfast sandwich from the corner deli. At first, I thought it was a parking ticket. My street was known for handing them out like candy. But the second I saw that thick black paper tucked neatly under my wiper blade, I knew exactly what it was. Same texture, same sharp corners, no stamp or address. I stood there in the cold morning haze, holding it like it might burn me. Inside was another card, same silver ink, but this time the message was longer. You moved out, Leland, but you didn't move on. I'm still 3 steps ahead. You'll see soon enough. I stared at those lines for a long time, long enough that someone walking their dog gave me a weird look. I didn't care. My skin felt like it was trying to crawl away from my bones. 3 steps ahead. Of what? Of who? Was she watching me? Listening? I hadn't told anyone I was living here except for 3 people, and one of them had sat at my table last night. By the time I got back inside, I had already double-locked the door and checked every camera feed from the cheap security system I installed 2 weeks ago. Nothing out of the ordinary. No footage of Carla. No strange cars. No signs of forced entry. But that card didn't land on my car by accident. It was placed. Chosen. Timed. I didn't eat breakfast that morning. Instead, I spent hours sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by unopened bills and empty mugs, trying to piece together a timeline that made sense. But no matter how I stacked the facts, one thing kept pulling at me like a splinter under the skin. Carla was planning something, and it had started long before she said she was done. My phone buzzed. It was Norbert, the closest thing I had to a best friend. I told him what happened. He didn't laugh, which was a change. He just said, "You remember that weird guy from her office party last year? The one who kept saying stuff under his breath when Carla walked by? I think his name was Roland or Rodney or something. You think he's got anything to do with this?" I did remember. In fact, I remembered exactly how Carla had looked when that man showed up. It was subtle, but she tensed. She laughed too loud around him, like she was trying to prove something. And when he left early without saying goodbye, she downed 2 glasses of wine and picked a fight with me about how I folded napkins. That man was not just a coworker. I opened my laptop and started digging. I looked up every old company photo, scoured tag posts from her friends, even checked LinkedIn profiles. Nothing. It was like he didn't exist. But I remembered his eyes. People like that don't just disappear. By noon, I was convinced of one thing. This wasn't just about a failed marriage. This was about control. Carla didn't just want to leave. She wanted to be the architect of how I unraveled afterward. Every message, every mind game, it was carefully crafted. The woman I married had once been sweet, spontaneous, charming. But somewhere along the way, something darker had taken root. The final straw that day came when I found her old burner phone. She used to keep it in her side table drawer for emergencies, a flimsy excuse I never questioned until now. But in my rush to move out of our old house, I'd swept that drawer into a box and forgot about it. It was dead when I plugged it in, but after a little charging, the lock screen lit up. No password. Just hundreds of unsent messages in the Notes app. Messages addressed to people whose names I didn't recognize. Some were romantic. Some were threatening. And some were written like she was coaching someone through manipulation. One note, dated 2 weeks before she left me, read: "Don't let him think he's in control. Smile. Let him believe he wants something. Then pull." I read it 3 times. Then pull. Pull what? The rug? The plug? The trigger? It was suddenly very clear to me that I hadn't walked out of a marriage. I'd walked out of a trap. But what scared me most wasn't that Carla had orchestrated all of this. It was the fact that I still didn't know why. And something told me. I was about to find out. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a minute. I lay on the couch with that burner phone next to me like it might start whispering secrets if I stared hard enough. Every creak in the walls sounded like footsteps. Every car that passed outside made my spine tighten. And all I could think about was that phrase, then pull. I kept going back into the Notes app. I'd read one entry, then scroll to another. Dozens of them. Sometimes only a few words, sometimes whole paragraphs. Some sounded like diary entries, others like scripts. One stuck with me more than the rest. It was written in all lowercase, dated nearly a year ago. No names. Just, "It has to be someone who won't fight back. Not at first. Someone predictable. Someone weak enough to confuse comfort with love." I read that one 5 times before I accepted what I already knew. She was talking about me. I had been chosen, not as a partner, not even as a husband. I'd been selected for compliance. For usefulness. That's why the first year of our marriage felt like a dream. She wasn't falling in love. She was laying the groundwork. By the time I finally drifted into a restless half-sleep, it was daylight again. I woke up to a vibration on my chest, my phone. It was Norbert. "Bro, someone just posted something about you. I think it's Carla. You need to see this." I jumped out of bed and grabbed my laptop. Sure enough, there it was. A vague but clearly targeted post on a neighborhood Facebook group Carla had never used before, until now. It was one of those just want to warn local women kind of posts, written like she was trying to be concerned but loaded with subtle poison. "There's a man in the Oak Ridge area who's been harassing me and a few other women. Emotionally manipulative, obsessive, unstable. Just want people to be careful. He drives a silver Camry." She knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't need to name me. Everyone in that thread knew I drove a silver Camry. Oak Ridge wasn't a big town. And once a few people started commenting with, "OMG, I think I know who you mean," the fuse was lit. Within hours, I was receiving weird stares at the grocery store. A mom pulled her kid closer when I walked past her near the checkout lane. The cashier didn't make eye contact. I could feel the shift, subtle, but thick like fog. The town wasn't sure what I'd done, but it was already starting to believe I'd done something. Carla had gone nuclear. And the worst part? She timed it perfectly. Right after showing up at my house. Right after leaving those cards. Right after seeing her again, the woman at my table. It was all a setup. A slow drip sabotage. I'd thought she was unhinged. But this was surgical. Calculated. She wasn't trying to get back together. She was trying to erase me. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't sit still anymore. I called the woman from that night, the one Carla had walked in on. Her name's Rachel, by the way. I hadn't told you before because, well, part of me was still trying to protect her. But after the Facebook post, I knew I had to bring her in. She picked up on the first ring, and her voice was calm, but urgent, like she'd been waiting for my call. "You need to come over," she said. "Now, there's something I haven't told you." I got there 20 minutes later. Her place was neat, minimal, quiet. The kind of place where secrets sit comfortably on shelves behind photos. She didn't offer coffee. She just led me to her living room and handed me an envelope, larger than the others, heavier. It had no return address. Inside were photographs. Carla, at a cafe, with him. Rodney, the man from the office party. The one I couldn't find online. Only, the photos weren't recent. They were from over 5 years ago. And in every single one, they weren't co-workers. They were close, intimate. And then the last photo hit me like a hammer to the ribs. Carla and Rodney standing in front of a sign that read, Desmond Behavioral Institute. Staff only. Not visitors. Staff. I looked up at Rachel, heart pounding. What is this? Her expression was grave. Rodney isn't her ex. He's her partner. They've been doing this for years. Isolating people. Playing with them. And if I'm right, you weren't their first. And you won't be their last. Suddenly, the notes on the phone weren't just private thoughts. They were playbooks. Strategies. Templates for destruction. And me? I wasn't just Carla's ex-husband. I was patient zero in something far bigger than I ever could have imagined. Rachel didn't say anything for a while after I stared at that last photo. She just let me sit there and stew in the silence, like she knew exactly how long it would take me to process the truth, or at least the part one could actually absorb. I felt like I had swallowed gravel. My hands shook a little as I put the photos back in the envelope, but my mind was already racing ahead. None of this had been random. Not the timing. Not the letters. Not the Facebook post. And not the woman Carla always swore she barely remembered from her past. Rachel. That dinner. That entire scene she walked into a few nights ago. It wasn't just a shock. It was a trigger. You should sit down, Rachel finally said. I was already sitting. That didn't seem to matter. What I'm about to tell you, you won't like it. But you need to hear it. She walked over to a locked drawer in her desk and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were documents. Official ones. Letters. Court filings. Therapy intake notes. Her name was on some of them. But not all. I was one of them, she said. Not just a witness. Not just a bystander. I was part of their experiment. 2 years before you met Carla. That word, experiment, sent a chill up my neck. It sounded like something you'd say in a lab, not in a living room. But the way she said it, with such certainty, I knew she wasn't exaggerating. They pick people who don't fight at first, Rachel said. People who mistake routine for stability. People who carry quiet trauma and don't ask too many questions. She took a shaky breath and kept going. Rodney and Carla, they meet people like us, learn our patterns, push us slowly toward dependency. Then they switch roles. One becomes the emotional bomb. The other becomes the savior. It's like psychological chess. I thought Rodney was trying to help me escape a toxic friendship. Turns out, they were both playing me. I didn't know what to say. My brain was a blender. The idea that my entire marriage had been some twisted behavioral project, that I had been selected for my ability to be emotionally manipulated. It was like finding out your whole house was built on sand, and no one told you until the day it started swallowing your furniture. But why? I asked finally. Why go through all that? What do they get out of it? Rachel opened a folder and showed me an article. It wasn't from a big site, just a psychology journal. Academic. Dense. But the title hit hard. Coercive Conditioning in Domestic Relationships. Emerging Patterns in Personality Syndromes and Financial Parasitism. They don't just do this for kicks, Rachel said. They do it for leverage. For assets. For blackmail. Every relationship has value. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's monetary. And sometimes it's access. She flipped to another page. A scanned invoice, my old workplace. My name was listed as the project lead on a bid for a government contract. One that had mysteriously disappeared off the books a few months before Carla left. My stomach dropped. I didn't even know this was public. It wasn't, Rachel said quietly. Which means she got it from you. Indirectly. Through conversation. Through distraction. She made sure you didn't even realize you were giving her intel. Just like she did to me. I stood up. I couldn't sit still anymore. The room was suddenly too hot. Too bright. I walked over to her window, pulled back the curtain slightly, and stopped cold. There was a car. Across the street. Engine running. Windows tinted so dark it looked like black glass. It hadn't been there when I arrived. And when I leaned a little to the left, the engine cut off. Rachel was behind me in a flash. Don't look again, she whispered. If it's him, we need to be smart. I stepped back and let the curtain fall. What does he want now? Rachel didn't answer right away. Her face had gone pale, her hands slightly trembling. If Rodney's here, it's because they think you figured out too much. Carla starts the fire. Rodney puts it out. That's the cycle. I turned to her, pulse pounding in my ears. So what happens now? She hesitated. Now? We flip the game. We stop being their subjects. I nodded slowly, the weight of every moment pressing against my chest. But I had no idea that Rachel was hiding something too. And within 48 hours, someone would end up in a hospital bed. I didn't go home that night. Not because I was afraid, not exactly, but because I knew if I stepped back into that house, I'd never see it the same way again. Every wall, every drawer, every inch of space Carla had once touched now felt like part of some hidden lab experiment, and I wasn't ready to sleep in the remnants of it. So I stayed at Rachel's place. Not because it was safe, but because it felt like the only place where someone else understood just how deep this rabbit hole really went. We barely spoke. The hours passed like we were on a timer neither of us could see. Rachel typed something endlessly on her laptop, and I just sat in silence, rereading those photos over and over again, trying to pick out something I missed. A symbol, a pattern, a face in the background. Anything. Sometime after midnight, I finally asked what had been gnawing at me for hours. How did you get these photos? She didn't answer immediately. She closed the laptop, slowly, and looked at me like she was calculating something behind her eyes. I had help, she said. From who? She hesitated, and then said it like she was testing how I'd react. From Rodney. The name hit like a hammer to the gut. I sat up straight. What? Rachel nodded slowly. 2 years ago, when everything went south between me and Carla, I reached out to him. I thought he was the safer one. I thought maybe he'd gotten pulled in like I had, that he'd help me expose her. And did he? I asked. Rachel looked down, then back up at me. At first, yes. He gave me all kinds of background. Warned me she'd try to discredit me. He helped me collect evidence. Said he was scared of her, that she'd gone rogue. He even told me to record our conversations, said I'd need proof. And then, she stared at me for a long time. Then he vanished. Changed his number. Deleted his socials. Ghosted me completely. I could see something shifting in her face. Guilt, maybe, or shame, or something darker. Something unspoken. But you kept the photos, I said. Yes, she whispered. And I thought that was it. I thought I'd beat them. Until you showed up. I stood up, my pulse spiking. Wait, you knew she was married again? You knew about me this whole time? Rachel didn't respond. And in that silence, something inside me cracked. That sick, slow realization started to creep in. The kind that doesn't scream. It just sits there in your stomach, heavy and quiet, like a bad pill you didn't mean to swallow. You weren't surprised when Carla walked in that night, I said, taking a step back. You didn't flinch. You didn't even look scared. Rachel's mouth twitched, just barely. Leland. No. No, don't. You sat at my table. You smiled at her like it was just another day. That wasn't a reaction. That was a performance. Her shoulders dropped. Not defeated, resigned. Everything I said was true, she said. Everything. But I didn't know they were watching you again until after we reconnected. I thought, maybe if I got close, I could protect you. Maybe if I stayed ahead of them, I could undo what they did to me. You used me, I said, my voice cracking more from hurt than anger. I tried to save you. No, I said, shaking my head, stepping toward the door. You tried to finish the test. Then the knock came. Loud. 3 short raps. Someone who wasn't pretending to be polite. Rachel froze. I looked at her. She looked at the door. And for the first time since I'd met her, Rachel looked genuinely afraid. Don't open it, she whispered. But I already knew. We were too late. The game wasn't about Carla. It wasn't about me. It was about control, and neither of us was holding the leash anymore. The knock came again, louder this time. Whoever was on the other side wasn't here to negotiate. I froze in the hallway, and Rachel, for all her careful planning, all her quiet confidence, looked genuinely paralyzed. I had never seen fear live in someone's face like that. Not just anxiety, but real, unfiltered terror. It told me everything I needed to know. Whoever was at the door, it was Rodney. I turned to Rachel and said, quietly but clearly, you need to go? Out the back. Now. She didn't argue. She grabbed the folder of documents and photos, shoved it into her satchel, and disappeared into the hallway. I waited until I heard the back door click shut. The knock came a third time. I stepped forward and opened the front door slowly, not in panic, but with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Calm. But there was no one there. Only a single envelope on the porch, weighed down by a smooth river stone. I picked it up. The card inside was handwritten, not printed like before. And the handwriting, it wasn't Carla's. It was Rodney's. I knew, because Rachel had shown me enough of his notes to recognize the stiff, clinical lettering. You were not the plan. You were supposed to fold, not flip the board. We're done now. Keep it that way. I stared at those words and something clicked. For the first time in months, maybe years, I realized I had finally done something they hadn't anticipated. I stopped playing by their script. I wasn't broken. I wasn't unraveling. I was still here. Still standing. Still me. I burned that letter in a stainless steel bowl on my back patio. Watched it turn to ash slowly. Then I walked back inside, locked the door behind me, and called Rachel. I think they're gone, I said. She didn't answer right away. Then, you sure? No. But I'm done letting them write the ending. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. No more knocks. No more letters. The Facebook post disappeared. The whispers around town stopped. Even Carla's friends, the ones who used to comment on everything she posted, went silent. And then, quietly, without drama, she moved out of state. Norbert told me she'd been seen boarding a plane with 2 duffel bags and no wedding ring. He sent me a photo of the empty house listing. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt finished. Rachel and I kept in touch, but from a distance. We both needed time. She eventually testified anonymously for a private investigation into behavior-based financial abuse. Turns out, there were others. Couples like us. Victims with no proof. People with stories that sounded too weird to be real. But now, we weren't silent anymore. As for me, I rebuilt. I sold my old car. I got a job outside of Dustin Falls. A small town with clean air and no memories. I even started volunteering at a local community center, helping people who had been through manipulative relationships and didn't know how to put themselves back together. And the dining table? Still mine. Still solid. Still ugly. But every scratch on it means something now. Every mark is a reminder. I didn't lose. I survived. Carla may have lit the match. Rodney may have written the script. But I rewrote the ending. And this time, it's peaceful. It's mine.